goal is to lose fat and build muscle, yet you struggle to stay consistent, don't have a consistent fitness routine, you feel like you're constantly restricting yourself in diet or giving up your favorite foods thinking that's what you need to do in order to lose the fat. Honestly, you just want practical and easy to implement tips to help transform your body and build a strong and lean physique. You're in the right space, been in the fitness industry for almost 6 years now. I haven't struggled with consistency for at least, I want to say, 3 years now. All the strategies that I implement now are exactly the ones that I'm going to share. If you feel like you're just starting out or you constantly hit a rut, that you find these tips helpful to help keep you consistent. So the 3 categories I want to get into is the nutrition, training, and then the last one, mindset. When it comes to building the routine, especially if you're trying to build muscle, you gotta understand that the whole journey is like 80% nutrition and then 20% is what you do outside of nutrition. So unless you struggle with a history of any ED or you were recommended to not ever track your food, first thing I'm going to recommend is learn how to track your food. A lot of the times we think we're eating enough, or we might be thinking that we're under eating, and it ends up being that the opposite has actually happened. Unless you know how much you're eating, it's really difficult to pinpoint what you need to be eating and where you can improve in your nutrition. For example, I've had clients where they thought they're in a calorie deficit because they weren't eating a lot of food, but what ended up happening was that even though it wasn't a lot of food, it was still very high calorie food. So what those foods look like were things like eating peanut butter, or they would snack on a bunch of trail mix. These things are very high in calories, but they don't leave you that filled. So it's easy to think that eat a lot of physical foods, you're still probably eating high calories, and that's why you're not losing any weight or fat. And there's also the other case where you're actually eating a lot, but you feel like you're not eating enough because you're always hungry. What could end up being the case is that you're eating a lot of foods that just aren't filling, things that are like low in protein, or meals that are just filled with just carbs. For example, yes, you're eating a bowl of fruit, which is great and fantastic, but at the end of the day, those are fast digesting carbs, so you're gonna be hungry within an hour, and then you're more likely to snack on maybe some chips. But until you add a protein and then a tiny fat content, you're probably gonna be filled. So if you are somebody who likes to enjoy a bowl of fruit, pair it with some yogurt and then just 1 serving of like peanut butter, just so you have a little bit of fats to kind of keep you full. But at the end of the day, tracking is something that you want to start on. And the good thing about tracking is that you don't have to do it all year round. You can just do it when you are getting really serious for like the next 8 to 12 weeks. This is how you're gonna get an idea of how much food you're eating and where you can kind of pinpoint your plateau that you feel like you're experiencing. And then when it comes to tracking, the things to watch out for are things that you just don't think need to be tracked. So let's say you're a mother, you're feeding your kids, they always leave a whole bunch of leftovers, so then you just snack on it and you think, oh, it's just a couple bites, it's whatever. But if it's something like, macaroni and cheese or chicken nuggets, just eating 3 chicken nuggets is already around 300 calories depending on the brand. So for what you might think is just a couple of bites, it's probably a lot. And then just same goes for the case throughout the day. Let's say you're tracking everything perfectly, but here and there you see your husband or your wife snacking on something. You just take like a couple bites. Depending what that food is, a couple of bites can still have 100 calories. Now imagine doing this throughout the day. You've probably eaten well over the calories that you're supposed to. So you kind of get my point as to why tracking is pretty important if you are trying to lose fat. And yes, there is an argument that you could just intuitively eat, so that way you don't have to worry about tracking food, but here's the thing with intuitive eating. You can't intuitively eat until you understand portion sizing. Intuitive eating comes from understanding how much food you're eating and pinpointing how full it makes you. So let's say you are on a calorie deficit because you're trying to lose fat, and the foods that you eat end up being really, really filling, so you know, okay, I'm full, so I'm gonna stop eating. And you know that the meal that you ate was at least 400 calories because you've already tracked it so many times, you already know exactly what it is. And then it's also understanding your hunger cues. A lot of the times we eat past fullness because we have been taught that unless you finish your plate, or unless every crumb is taken off the plate, you're gonna be wasting food. We have now become so accustomed to just eating past fullness. So eating until fullness is a skill to also learn, and then also just learning how to not boredomly eat. Food gives us a boost of serotonin, so it's really easy to look to food whenever you're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, or bored. And if you're someone who struggles with that, you can't really intuitively eat at that point because you're no longer eating intuitively. Okay, so that's basically the gist on tracking. Now, when it comes to tracking, the next point I want to make is that you want to start in maintenance. I think a lot of people just automatically want to jump into being a calorie deficit, which is great, which is fine. But what I kind of find to see is that people will restrict so much when they go into a calorie deficit that they just end up not eating enough food. So then they feel miserable and they end up binge eating at night. So why do I recommend you start in maintenance? You're neither gaining or losing weight. This is a perfect spot to practice practice eating to fullness. It's a little bit more flexibility in your calories. So if you're someone who isn't ready just yet to give up some of the more high calorie foods, maintenance is a great place to start. You have plenty of room to eat all your protein, all your carbs, all your fats, plus some extra fun food. Maintenance is also personally great when you're in the season of summer. So many people become so focused on trying to get shredded for summer, which I get it, you want to look good in a bikini, but being in a deficit while trying to enjoy the summer activities is really difficult. Try being on a deficit when you have a full week of birthday parties, graduation, barbecues, concerts. At some point, it's gonna be really hard to be in a deficit for like 5 days straight when you just want the flexibility to still be able to eat all your meals without feeling like you're gaining weight. Maintenance is also a good place to start because you can still build muscle, especially if you're somebody who doesn't understand how to train. I'm gonna get into the training aspect a little bit later, but just know in maintenance, like you still have full energy level. You're at this point of like equilibrium in your body where you're neither feeling too hungry, but you're also not too full. And like I said, it's just a lot easier to be in maintenance when you're especially starting out and you're kind of trying to figure out what your sustainable fitness routine should be. Okay, next is basically understanding macros. Macronutrients are composed of your protein, carbs, and fats. And the biggest mistake that I see people make is that they just don't add in enough protein when protein should be at least 40% of every meal you eat. And once you start tracking, you'll start kind of seeing how little of protein that you're really eating. A lot of people think that, oh, I'll just have this little slab of chicken with my salad and we're good to go. But what ends up being is that chicken is probably like 2 ounces at best. And let's say your next protein source is like a yogurt, maybe add another 10 grams. By the end of the day, you probably hit 80 grams of protein, which may not be enough depending on your goal. But the idea is that when you have a full plate of food, you want majority of it to be protein, and then you have a little section of fats, and then you have the carbs. You still need a little bit of everything because every macronutrient plays a different role in your body. I won't go into the more nitty-gritty of the science details, but just know that when you eat protein, it helps regulate your hormones, it helps regulate protein synthesis and breaking down protein, which is really important if you're trying to build muscle. It aids in so much of your menstrual cycle, essentially does a lot for your body. And there's also fats, which is also mainly responsible for hormone production. So if you find that you're someone with very low libido, or you're irritable, or you just feel like you're never full, you're probably low in your fat. And then of course there's carbs, where everybody thinks it's the ultimate evil, but it truly is not. Carbs is the main source of energy that your body looks to. It'd be like, well, people on keto don't need it, and it's the science behind that. When there's not enough carbs in your diet, when it has been completely depleted in your body is now going to look to use fat as your source of energy. Now this takes time for your body to do that. It's not going to just happen overnight from not eating carbs. If anything, you're going to feel miserable for at least the first 2-3 days of not eating carbs and just eating protein and fats. And I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking, well, I need to try and enter the fat burning zone. The fat burning zone is just the zone in your body where you have completely depleted all glycogen and carb sources, so now it's looking to the second source, which is fats. That is also why you probably find yourself really hungry after a really intense workout or a run, because your body is just begging for some carbs. It needs that energy to keep your body functioning and going. In fact, your brain needs at least 130 grams of carbs every day for proper brain function. So carbs are very important. We do not neglect them. And if you feel a little unsure on how to get started with just eating enough protein, a good rule of thumb, good rule of palm, I guess, is that you want a protein source that is basically the size of your palm every time you eat food. Typically, this is at least 4 ounces of whatever protein choice that you have chosen. That is the nutrition side of it. By the way, if you're unsure on how to actually find your maintenance calories, you can go on any TDEE calculator and you can always pull up the website. You'll enter in your information. Don't worry about your body fat percentage too much. Now, when you look at the activity levels, when it asks you, it's also the assumption that you are getting at least 7,000 or more steps. So even let's say you work out every single day, 7 days a week, do not put that unless you are also walking over 7,000 steps every day. If you're someone like me who works out 3 to 4 times a week and I get at least 8,000 steps every day, that is the option I will choose. Yes, I work out pretty much every day if I'm getting in my step goal, but that does not mean my calorie intake is gonna be that large. Typically, this is kind of more for the athletes because they are training day and night because that is their job, and so they need that extra calories. Okay, so let's jump into the training side of it. The first thing is just you gotta be real with yourself. Really figure out how many days can you commit to the gym. While social media is great, also altered our perception of what the best is for ourselves. We get overconsumed about what works for other people, and when you see somebody of like a similar body type as you, maybe the similar like body goals that they have, you tend to want to gravitate to whatever that they're doing. But at the end of the day, you gotta do what's best for you. Depending on your goals, I personally think that you should not be working out more than 4 times a week. Having 2 days for upper body and 2 days for lower body is more than enough. I have never programmed my clients to have more than 4 days a week. I have never been in a program where they didn't just only give me 4 days a week. 4 is a sweet spot. It doesn't matter if your favorite influencer is doing 5 days a week. Some people reserve a 5th day just to do cardio and abs, and I really don't think it's necessary to dedicate a whole day just to do that. And that is what I personally think. Obviously, do what you feel is right. Now, once you kind of figure out how many days you're able to work and you're being honest with yourself, and yes, even working out 1 or 2 times a week is still enough. I have had clients where school and life just got way too hard, so we only programmed to go work out once a week and we did like a full body style. So there is nothing wrong if all you can commit right now is just 1 day a week. You can always increase it when life gets easier. Okay, now let's talk about working your muscles in different ranges. Now, if the goal is to build muscle, you want to always aim for the lengthened position. What does this mean? It's just a fancy term saying that your muscles are worked in the more lengthened part. There are 3 ways you can work a muscle. There's a shortened, mid, and lengthened. What has been glorified on social media is working your muscles in the shortened position, which are things like hip thrusts, past glute bridges. Those are great. Those are fine. It's important to incorporate every now and then, but it should not be your main focus. So if your goal is to grow your legs or your glutes, you want to focus on the lengthened movements. Those can look like doing step-ups, Romanian deadlifts, single leg elevated lunges, Bulgarian split squats. Like I will put up a whole list right here just to let you know. So that's like for lower body, same for upper body. These are all the lengthened ways that you can work those muscles. And then of course there is the mid ranges where it's still going to be really beneficial to incorporate, because those are things like deadlifts, bench press. The idea to target a muscle to help it grow is that you want to work it in positions you can load. While let's say goblet squat is going to be really good if you're just starting out because you're just getting used to the squatting position, that's great. But at some point you might just give out because your upper body can no longer hold that weight in front of you. So then that's when you can graduate to doing like our barbell squat, whether it's the front or back. Why? Because you can load it over time. Because there's going to become a point where when you're doing a goblet squat, your legs can carry a lot more than your upper body can. That's just the anatomy of it. Your legs are a bigger muscle, so you can add more load to them. And this is not to say you need to start incorporating only lengthened positions in your workouts. It's still important to work your muscles in different ranges, because working them in different ranges will then specify like any weaknesses or muscle imbalances you have. So like for me, when it came to growing my glutes, I never really did hip thrust. 1, because it just took too long to set up, and 2, I just really did not enjoy it. Call me crazy or weird, but those were just exercises that I don't like just feeling an isolated part of my body hurting. Okay, the next thing I want to get into is working your muscles close to failure. When you're lifting, there's a range to go by. It goes from 0 to 10, 10 being like absolute failure, like you cannot perform another rep, and then 0 just being absolutely nothing. This is known as RPE, the rate of perceived exertion. The closer you are to 10, the harder that intensity is. Now, this is where most people fall. They feel that once they feel the muscle work, they feel that slight burn, that's where they stop. But the thing is, you gotta go past the burn. You gotta go at least 3-4 reps after it, because that is where muscle is built. Another way you can know, let's say you're performing an exercise and the beginning reps are really easy. You want those last few reps to be so hard that the speed of what you're going is almost like slow motion. If this is something that you don't experience in any of your lifts, it means you need to lift heavier. I promise you're not going to become bulky and you're going to wake up the next day like super jacked. It doesn't work like that, because if it did, then every guy who has ever gone to the gym would be jacked as fuck right now. Working close to failure is actually a skill that takes time to learn, but once you understand how it actually feels, especially when you're working lower body, because I know it can feel kind of scary, I wouldn't recommend it doing on a lift that you don't know how to fail. You want to have plenty of safeties, you know, like a barbell squat. Unless you know how to properly fail safely, learn how to do it. I wouldn't 100% recommend it. Or what you could also do is just practice failing with just the bar. That way you kind of understand how you need to position your body when that happens, make sure your hair isn't in the way, all those things. But until you've actually practiced what it means to lift to failure, you're probably just not lifting heavy enough, and that's why you're not challenging your muscles. No, you don't need to switch up your workouts every time. That is the beauty of progressive overload, which brings me to the next point of progressive overload. Progressive overload is just another way of saying how to change the same exercise to make it more challenging. A lot of people kind of gravitate towards adding more weight, and while most exercises you could probably do that, I would imagine for things like a bench press or lateral raises, it's not going to be as easy to do because the smaller a muscle is, the less likely you could just jump on a bigger weight. The different ways that you can incorporate that is being on the same training program, doing the same exercises for 4 to even up to 12 weeks sometimes. And you want to challenge yourself, whether it's doing tempo work, adding pauses, but finding different ways to challenge the same type of movement without necessarily always adding more weight. Really, my favorite type of progressive overload is just working on tempo because it really forces us to slow down in the movement and actually feel where the muscle is working. A lot of mistakes I see my clients do is that they'll just go through the motions, they'll just do the workout really quick and then be done. But it's like, take your time to actually feel the challenge and where and what muscles are being worked. Another thing I want to point out is just because you don't feel the muscle working does not mean it's not actually working. Whenever I program deadlifts or remaining deadlifts for my clients, they say that they never feel it in their glutes. While it is still working your glutes, it's okay if you don't 100% feel it. Just because you don't feel it doesn't mean that it's not working. It's more fun to have that sensory stimulus to make us feel like we're actually working hard, but it could also be really misleading. And then the last thing I want to get into in the mindset part of it is you just got to be patient. I have been on my journey now for 5 years with actually being serious about building muscle in the last 2 years. My first years in the gym was actually more powerlifting focused because I was just addicted to hitting numbers and I loved getting stronger. And while it was fun, I remember just looking back at one video and seeing like some quad definition and I was like, I like that. How do I keep doing that? And that's when I realized that it just involves a different style of training. I hired coaches to help me go through it. I earned my own certification so I can also understand the science behind it so I don't need as much help anymore. All in all, it did take time to get where I am now. If you were to see my first picture from the very start before I even started lifting weights, sometimes I don't recognize her, but also at the same time, I kind of miss being in that body type because it was so much easier to shop for clothes. It was a lot easier to wear certain clothes in public without feeling like I'm drawing too much attention, even though at the end of the day, like I'm just wearing clothes and it shouldn't have to be that way. With how some men are, you can't help when people stare and if people judge, but just know that it is going to take time. But because it's going to take time, you may as well put in the work now. I know it can be really discouraging to think like, well, if that took you 5 years, like what's the point? Thing is 5 years is going to pass regardless. You know what I mean? Just because something takes too much time, it should not discourage you from trying to do it. And in that 5 years, you can get so much better at whatever it is that you're struggling with. You don't know how to track calories, I guarantee you're gonna be a pro at it within 6 months. Probably not even 6 months, probably within 2 weeks. You don't know how to do a certain exercise, I guarantee you will be a pro at it within 3 months. There was actually a statistic that Mel Robbins said in one of her podcasts that it takes 19 days to make a habit. I don't know how true it is, but I feel like it's relatively correct. It takes 3 weeks to make something into a sustainable habit. So I feel like 19 days is pretty accurate. And there's so many things that you can do in between those 5 or however many years you want to be on this journey for. That's why non-aesthetic goals are so important to have. For me, I really wanted to get better in my pull-ups. It started out from barely being able to do 1 and now I can kind of effortlessly do, on a good day, 10 in a row, but for the most part, I can for sure do at least 5. And every time you're able to do 1 more rep further than you would either the previous month or the previous week, it makes you feel so good in your body because it creates this level of confidence that you didn't know you had. And in my opinion, the best way to get more confident in yourself and in your abilities is to be a beginner at something, because the more that you see that you're accomplishing on your own, the more it builds your confidence. Yes, it's going to require stepping out of your comfort zone because you're going to be doing things that you've never done before. It'll feel foreign. It's going to feel different. Naturally, your mind is going to want to like not do it because all our minds know how to do is to keep you safe. And by keeping you safe is just sticking to what it already knows. To do something where your mind doesn't know, it's going to kind of cause your body to be a little hesitant. You might even experience some anxiety, but that's all part of the process, because once you overcome that, you will literally be unstoppable in all the goals you want to do. So if you're just starting out, follow these tips and I promise you will start effortlessly making this into a routine. You're gonna start building the muscle, you're gonna start losing the fat, and it's all going to make sense, but don't expect it to happen within a day or within a month. But what I can guarantee is that when you start implementing all of this, you're gonna feel the difference within 2 weeks, and by 4 weeks, you're gonna notice some form form of change, whether it's less bloat because now you're eating more nutritional food. It could actually be that maybe you lost half a pound, because realistically, if you're in a calorie deficit, you should be losing at least half a pound a week, or you might just be losing inches off your waist. Like, there are so many different ways to see if whether or not what you're doing is working. And even if it feels like it's not working, just know that it is, and that there is a process to it. It might require some trial and error, but that's just how life is. You didn't just wake up knowing how to walk. You didn't just wake up knowing how to ride a bike. You probably fell at least once before you understood how to ride a bike. So it's the same idea here. You might fall a few times. It might get frustrating, but just trust in the process. So that's all I had for today's video. If you enjoyed, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment if you have any questions, and I will see you next time.